My name is Susie Washer, and I'm 31 years old. I was never supposed to exist. At least that's how it always felt. My parents liked to joke that I was their little surprise, but there was nothing warm about the way they said it. I was born 2 years after my sister Mary, their golden child, their miracle. I, on the other hand, came into this world too early, too small, with a heart that refused to beat properly. While the doctors fought to keep me alive, my mother cried, not from fear of losing me, but from the inconvenience of it all. That's the earliest story they ever told about me, and it never sounded like love. Growing up in our house was like living inside a shadow cast by someone else's sunshine. Mary glowed. She was everything they'd ever wanted, beautiful, athletic, brilliant. My parents would beam at her like she was some kind of divine proof that they had done something right in life. When it came to me, the smiles were thinner, the sighs longer, and the love conditional. I remember one evening, I must have been 7, when Mary had her friends over for her birthday party. The whole house smelled like frosting and laughter. I was upstairs in my room, listening to the music drift up through the floorboards, wishing I could just be part of it. When I finally crept down the stairs, my mom caught sight of me and hissed, "Susie, go back upstairs. You'll tire yourself out." Her tone was sweet enough to fool the guests, but sharp enough to slice through my chest. I wasn't sick that night. I was just unwanted. Mary always knew she was the favorite, and she wore it like a crown. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I was told to be grateful for what I already had. She used to say things like, "Mom says you shouldn't stress your weak little heart," whenever she wanted me out of her way. She'd smile when she said it, that perfect practice smile that everyone adored, but I could see the cruelty behind it. I learned early that she didn't need to shout to hurt me. My grandparents were the only ones who ever saw me for who I was. They were quiet people, soft-spoken, but their house felt like sunlight after years of rain. Grandpa used to hold my hand and tell me that hearts like mine, the ones that beat unevenly, were often the strongest. Grandma would sneak me little gifts, a notebook, a book of poems, a slice of her cherry pie things that reminded me I mattered to someone. But whenever I came home from their place, the air changed. My mother would complain about how spoiled I'd become. My father would mutter something about medical bills. They talked about my heart condition like it was a sin I'd committed on purpose. Once, after a particularly expensive hospital stay, my dad said over dinner, "If it weren't for all these medical costs, we'd have taken a real vacation by now." I remember staring at my plate, realizing that my existence had become a line item on their budget. As I got older, Mary's cruelty evolved into indifference, which somehow hurt more. She had friends, parties, trophies. I had textbooks and silence. At school, the teachers loved her. At home, the neighbors praised her. And me, I was the girl who looked tired, the one who missed gym class because of that heart thing. Even when I accomplished something, it didn't matter. Once I won a small short story competition at school. I begged my parents to come to the ceremony. They promised they would. They didn't show. Later that night, I heard my mother say to my father, "She'll get over it. We can't be everywhere." But they were at Mary's soccer game that same day. By the time I turned 16, I'd stopped expecting anything from them. It was easier that way. When Mary shoved me down the stairs once after I accidentally touched her art project, my mom didn't ask if I was okay. She said, "You should have been more careful." I lay there on the cold floor, the bruise forming on my back, realizing she wasn't talking about the fall, she was talking about my place in this family. "Be careful, Susie. Don't take up space that doesn't belong to you." So I learned to shrink myself, to speak softly, to disappear when Mary entered the room. I became a ghost long before I left that house. Still, I kept a secret promise to myself that one day I'd leave and never come back. I didn't know where I'd go or how I'd survive, but I knew I couldn't keep living like a mistake that refused to die. Then one afternoon, something small changed. I came home from school to find Grandma waiting on our porch. She said she wanted to take me for a drive. We ended up at the lake just outside town, the place she always said helped her think. I remember her sitting beside me on the weathered bench, watching the sunlight dance on the water. "You're different, Susie," she said softly. "And I don't mean your heart. You feel things deeply, even the things people pretend not to notice. That's your gift. Don't let them take that from you." Her words stayed with me, tucked in the quiet corners of my mind like a secret weapon. Every time Mary mocked me, every time my parents looked through me, I'd repeat them like a prayer. "Don't let them take that from you." The night before I left for college, I stood in the hallway between our rooms. Mary's door was covered in photos, medals, and the remnants of another celebration's streamers drooping like tired smiles. My door had nothing. I pressed my hand against it and whispered goodbye. My parents barely said a word when I told them I'd been accepted into a university several states away. My mom's only comment was, "Well, maybe some space will be good for you." I wanted to laugh. Space was the only thing they'd ever given me freely. On the morning I left, they didn't come to see me off. It was Grandpa who drove me to the station. When the bus pulled away, I looked back through the window and saw him standing there, a small, proud figure fading in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I felt the weight of freedom pressing against my chest. As the town disappeared behind the hills, I thought about all the times I'd wondered if they'd ever notice when I was gone. I realized I already knew the answer. Still, I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from something. I was running to Washer myself. And I had no idea that someday I'd be forced to return to the place I fought so hard to escape, only to discover that my family's love had conditions far darker than I ever imagined. College felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. For the first time, I could breathe without fear of saying the wrong thing. No one there knew about Mary, or my parents, or my so-called delicate heart. I was just another freshman trying to find her place. At first, the silence was strange. I kept expecting someone to call to check in to tell me they missed me, but days turned into weeks and my phone stayed quiet. I told myself it was a blessing, and most days it was. Still, there were nights I'd lie awake staring at the glow of my dorm ceiling, wondering if they even remembered I existed. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. I'd gone to one of those Awkwasher icebreaker events the dorms host at the start of the year. I almost skipped it. Small talk wasn't my thing, but fate has a way of showing up when you least expect it. That's when I met Greg. He wasn't loud or flashy like the others. He had this calm energy, like he'd already made peace with the world. When I mentioned I was from out of state, he smiled and said, "Sometimes distance is the best therapy." I remember laughing because he was right, though he couldn't have known how much. We started talking more after that. Study sessions turned into coffee runs. Coffee runs turned into late-night walks across campus. He asked questions no one had ever cared to ask before, not the surface kind, but the ones that make you pause and think. When I told him I grew up feeling invisible, he didn't try to fix it. He just said, "Some people need to lose you before they notice the silence you leave behind." With Greg, I felt something I'd never felt before safe. I told him about my heart condition one evening while we sat under a tree after class. The branches were dripping from the rain, and he just nodded quietly. "You've been through a lot," he said, "but you're still here. That counts for something." It wasn't pity, it was respect, and that made all the difference. Over time, the loneliness I'd carried for years started to fade. I joined a writing group. I made friends who didn't measure my worth in comparison to someone else's. Every small piece of normal life felt like a rebellion against the past. By our senior year, Greg and I were inseparable. He was there when I got my first job offer. He came to every medical appointment when I felt my heart flutter unpredictably. Once, when I apologized for being too much trouble, he just smiled and said, "You're not trouble, Susie. You're the calm I didn't know I needed." When he proposed after graduation, simple. No grand gestures, just him. Kneeling in our tiny apartment with shaking hands, I said yes before he even finished the question. His family welcomed me as their own from the start. His mother hugged me the first time we met and said, "Any woman who makes my son this happy is already family." I nearly cried right there. It was such a small thing, but after a lifetime of being treated like an obligation, that simple acceptance felt like grace. The wedding was modest but perfect. We held it at a local garden where the light filtered through the trees like liquid gold. Greg's parents helped with the costs, while mine predictably declined the invitation. My mother's exact words were, "We just spent so much on Mary's wedding last year. You'll understand someday." I didn't understand, and I stopped trying to. I sent them photos after Washer anyway. They never responded. But I wasn't sad. Standing there with Greg's hand in mine, surrounded by laughter that felt genuine, I realized something important: you can build a family out of love, not blood. And maybe that's what I'd been meant to do all along. We settled down in the city where we'd studied. I got a job in publishing. Greg worked in architecture, and our life began to take shape, quiet, steady, filled with small joys. Sunday pancakes, late-night movie marathons, the kind of peace that makes you forget how loud your childhood was. Then came the day that flipped my world again. I still remember holding the pregnancy test in the bathroom, staring at the two pink lines, like they were some kind of miracle and curse rolled into one. My hands shook so badly that Greg had to steady them. I could see the worry flash in his eyes before he forced a smile. "Susie," he said softly, "are you okay?" I wasn't. Not really. My doctors had warned me years ago that pregnancy would be risky, maybe even fatal because of my heart. But when I felt that faint pulse of life inside me, I couldn't bring myself to let it go. The months that followed were brutal. There were hospital stays, endless tests, and sleepless nights where Greg sat beside me, reading aloud, just to keep me calm. The doctors suggested termination more than once. I refused. If my heart's going to fail, I told Greg it'll be for something worth loving. When our son Noah was finally born, he was small, but strong. The moment I heard his cry, something inside me healed, like my heart finally remembered how to beat for the right reasons. But the cost was high. The doctors told me bluntly that another pregnancy could kill me. They even had me sign a document acknowledging the risk. Greg and I agreed without hesitation Noah would be our only child. We had our miracle. We wouldn't tempt fate twice. The years that followed were peaceful again. We built our lives around Noah, small parks, bedtime stories, his laughter echoing through our home. I'd watch Greg teaching him to ride a bike and think, this is what love is supposed to look like. For a while, it felt like the past had finally loosened its grip. My parents were a distant memory, my sister, just another stranger in old photos. I was free, or so I thought. Then the phone rang one gray afternoon. I recognized the voice immediately, shaky, older, but unmistakable. "Susie, honey. My grandmother said your grandpa's not doing well. It might be time to come home." Her words hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Greg looked at me across the room, already knowing what I was thinking. Home. The word didn't sound like comfort anymore. It sounded like a warning. Still, I couldn't ignore it. Grandpa had been the only one who ever truly believed in me. So I said quietly, "Okay, we'll come." I didn't know it then, but going back would cost me more than I ever imagined. Because the family I'd left behind wasn't done taking from me, not yet. It was strange driving back into my hometown after almost a decade. The streets felt smaller, the houses older. Everything looked familiar, yet hollow, like a memory that had been drained of color. Greg kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on mine, tracing small circles against my palm, the way he always did when he sensed my anxiety. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly as the welcome sign came into view. "I know," I whispered, "but I owe it to Grandpa." He nodded, and that was enough. When we pulled into my grandparents' driveway, the sight of the old porch nearly broke me. Grandpa was thinner, frailer, but his smile was the same warm, patient, full of pride. He hugged me like no time had passed, like all the years I'd spent trying to forget this place didn't matter. But behind him, I saw my parents standing near the doorway. My mother's expression was unreadable, a polite practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father gave a half wave. For a moment, I thought maybe this could be civil. Maybe we'd just focus on Grandpa and nothing else. Then Mary appeared. She looked exactly the same, perfect hair, perfect posture. Even her perfume was the same sugary scent that used to make me nauseous as a teenager. She came up and hugged me too tightly, whispering, "You look different." Different, how I asked, stepping back. She smiled that same rehearsed smile. "Happier, I guess. It's good to see you." Her words were kind, but her eyes flicked to my wedding ring, to Noah, to Greg, assessing, calculating. Over the next few days, we visited Grandpa daily. Those moments were pure. He'd hold Noah in his arms, tracing his tiny fingers and telling him stories about fishing and patience, about how strength didn't always look loud. It reminded me of my childhood summers back when love still had a voice. But every time I returned to my parents' house, the air shifted. They were different, too kind, too careful. My mother suddenly wanted to know everything about my life, my job, Greg's work, Noah's school. She cooked dinner for us, even baked a pie, something she hadn't done since I was a kid. My father told me he was proud of how I'd turned out. Those words landed heavy, like they'd been rehearsed in front of a mirror. I didn't trust it. One night after dinner, Greg pulled me aside. "They're being nice because they want something," he said. "You can feel it too, right?" I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to believe they'd changed, that maybe they'd realized how badly they'd treated me. But the truth was written in every Awkwasher pause, every strange glance between them when they thought I wasn't looking. Then came the invitation. 2 weeks after we moved back, my parents called. My mom's voice was sugary sweet. "We'd love to have you and Greg over for dinner this weekend. Mary will be there too. Just a family night like old times." Old times. The words made my stomach twist. Greg frowned when I told him. You sure you want to go? No, I said, but if I don't, they'll just find another way to corner me. Better to face it head on. Saturday came too soon. I spent the entire drive rehearsing polite answers, fake smiles, mental exits. Greg squeezed my knee once we parked. If it gets weird, we leave. No questions. Inside, everything looked too perfect, the table set with fine china candles burning wine already poured. My mother's voice was chirpy and controlled. You two must be starving. I made lasagna, your favorite, Susie. My favorite. She hadn't remembered that in years. Dinner began harmlessly enough. Small talk. Weather. Noah's favorite cartoons. Mary talked about her charity work, and my parents hung on every word. I stayed quiet, answering only when asked. Halfway through the meal, I noticed my mother's fingers trembling slightly as she refilled her glass. My father avoided eye contact. And Mary kept watching me. Her expression was calm but distant, like she was holding on to something heavy. Then she set down her fork and smiled. Susie, I actually have a little surprise for you. My heart sank. A surprise. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with gold foil. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, she said, her tone almost gentle. And I wanted to do something meaningful, something that could bring us all closer again. I hesitated before taking it. Greg's eyes were on me, silently warning. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, her initials embossed on the back. My fingers felt cold as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter printed on fine stationery. It wasn't handwritten. It looked official. My eyes skimmed the words. Phrases jumped out before my brain could catch up. Surrogacy agreement. Intended parents, Mary and Richard Collins. Proposed carrier, Susie Washer. For a moment, everything blurred. The words didn't make sense. I looked up thinking it was a joke, but no one was laughing. My mother's face was soft, expectant. My father's jaw was tight. Mary sat there, her hands folded neatly, watching me like she was waiting for applause. What is this? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mary leaned for Washer. You know how Richard and I have been struggling to have a baby. The doctor said it's impossible for me to carry. But you could help us, Susie. You could give us this gift. You'd be keeping it in the family. In the family, I repeated, stunned. You mean risk my life for you? My mother jumped in. Oh, don't be dramatic, sweetheart. The doctors will take good care of you. Think of what this means for Mary. I could feel my pulse in my throat, fast, uneven, dangerous. Greg's hand slid onto mine under the table, steadying me. Did you forget? I said, slowly turning to my mother. The doctors told me I can't have another pregnancy. Ever. My heart won't survive it. My father exhaled through his nose, annoyed. You're exaggerating. People have conditions all the time. It's manageable. Manageable. I snapped, my voice breaking. It almost killed me last time. Mary's lip quivered, but her eyes stayed sharp. I thought you'd understand. After everything we've been through as sisters. What sisters? I cut her off. You made sure we never were. Silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room. My mother's tone hardened. You're being selfish, Susie. You have a healthy child. Mary doesn't. Family helps family. Greg stood then, his voice calm but cold. We're leaving. My father barked, sit down, but Greg didn't. He took my hand, helped me up, and led me to Washer the door. As we reached the threshold, my mother called after me, her voice like ice. Don't forget, Susie, blood always pays its debt. I stopped for half a second, my chest tight, the old ache flaring. Then I turned to her. I think I've paid enough, I said, and closed the door behind us. In the car, the silence was deafening. Greg didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there staring ahead. You okay? He asked eventually. I nodded, though my voice shook when I whispered no, but I will be. Because deep down I knew that dinner wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. For the next few days, I barely spoke. The words from that dinner replayed in my head like a broken record. Family helps family. You're selfish. Blood always pays its debt. Greg tried to pull me out of it, but how do you reason with betrayal that deep? It wasn't just what they asked. It was how easily they assumed I'd say yes, as if my life had always belonged to them and they were simply cashing in on what was owed. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread open before me. The language was clinical compensation optional. Consent implied upon signature. But I'd never signed anything. The arrogance of it, printing my name like I was property, made my hands shake. Greg leaned on the counter, arms crossed. They planned this, Susie. This wasn't impulsive. They must have been talking about it for months. I nodded, throat tight. That's what scares me most. They didn't ask, they decided. He came over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. I could feel his heartbeat against my back, strong and steady, the kind of rhythm mine had always struggled to keep. "They don't get to decide anymore," he murmured. "You don't owe them your body. You don't owe them anything." I wanted to believe him, but guilt is a stubborn thing. It doesn't vanish when logic steps in. It lingers like smoke after the fire's out. That night, when Greg went to bed, I stayed up rereading the letter under the dim kitchen light. There was a section near the end that made my stomach twist. Subject's prior health conditions acknowledged. Risk acceptance required. Subject, not sister, not daughter. Subject. The more I read, the more I realized what that dinner truly was, not an invitation, but an ambush. My family had come together not to apologize or reconnect, but to make a request that could kill me. And they did it with dessert on the table. 2 days later, I got a call from my mother. I didn't want to answer, but my finger betrayed me. "Susie." She began, her tone tight, but falsely sweet. We didn't get a chance to finish our conversation. "There's nothing to finish," I said flatly. She sighed dramatically. "You've always been sensitive. We're asking for help, that's all. You make it sound like we're trying to harm you." I almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. "You are trying to harm me. The doctor said another pregnancy could stop my heart." "You always exaggerate these things," she said, her voice sharpening. "You survived before, didn't you?" "I barely survived," I snapped. "Do you even hear yourself?" There was a pause, that cold, calculated silence I'd known since childhood. Then she said, "Mary's been crying for days. She can't sleep. She's so hurt by your selfishness." There it was, the word again. Selfish. It was their favorite weapon. They'd used it all my life, sharp and efficient. I didn't reply. I just ended the call and turned my phone face down. Later that evening, as the house grew quiet, I heard Noah laughing softly in his sleep. That sound grounded me. It reminded me why I had to stand firm. My body wasn't theirs to use. My son needed me alive, not martyred for a sister who'd never shed a real tear for me in her life. But of course, they weren't finished. 3 days later, my father texted, "We need to talk. You're tearing the family apart." That sentence hit like a punch, not because it was true, but because I'd heard it before. I remembered being 10 years old, standing in the living room after Mary shoved me into a table, and my mom saying the same thing. "You always make everything worse, Susie. You ruin the peace." History was repeating itself, just with higher stakes. Greg found me reading the text. He didn't even have to ask. The look on my face said everything. "Block them," he said quietly. "I can't," I whispered. "Not yet." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then at least promise me you won't go see them alone." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. That night, as the rain beat softly against the windows, I had a dream, or maybe a memory. I was back in the hospital after giving birth to Noah. My body was weak, trembling, the monitors beeping beside me. I remember my doctor's words. "You were lucky this time. Your heart stopped for 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's how close I'd come to dying. When I woke up, my chest was tight, not from fear, but from anger. The kind that builds slowly until it burns clean. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I sat down at my desk and wrote my parents an email. My fingers trembled, but my words didn't. "I will not risk my life for Mary. What you're asking is cruel, illegal, and unforgivable. You lost the right to call me your daughter the moment you treated me like a vessel instead of a person. Do not contact me again." I hovered over send for a long moment. Then I clicked it. When Greg came into the room later, I didn't say anything, just showed him my screen. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "That's my girl." For the first time since that dinner, I felt a sliver of peace, but it didn't last long. That evening, while washing dishes, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I ignored it, but a message appeared seconds later. "You can't ignore family forever. There are ways to make you change your mind." No name, no emoji, just that chilling sentence. I felt the familiar flutter in my chest, the dangerous rhythm I'd tried to leave behind. Greg took one look at my face and grabbed the phone. "Who was it?" "I don't know," I said, though deep down I did. He clenched his jaw. "They're crossing the line now." And that's when I realized this wasn't a request anymore. It was a threat. What I didn't know then was how far they were willing to go, or what they'd already done behind my back. I thought sending that email would end it, that my silence would finally mean peace. But silence in my family never meant peace, it meant preparation. A week passed before the first ripple. I was at work halfway through editing a manuscript when my phone buzzed again. I expected Greg or my boss. Instead, it was Mary. "Mary, I can't believe you're doing this to me, Mary. You're my sister. You owe me that much, Mary. You have a healthy body. I don't." 3 messages back to back, No greeting, no explanation, just accusation. I didn't reply, but she kept sending them. Every hour. Sometimes begging, sometimes furious. If the situation were reversed, I'd do it for you. Mom and Dad are devastated. You've broken their hearts. You'll regret this. It was like being dragged back into childhood all over again, when Mary would lie, cry, manipulate, and somehow everyone believed her while I was left defending the truth. Greg told me to block her. I said I would. I lied. Part of me still wanted to understand why. Why would she ask something like that? Why wasn't my no enough? Then the calls started. Private numbers. Hang-ups when I answered. A car parked across the street from our house for hours, some nights tinted windows, engine idling. Greg said it was coincidence. I wasn't so sure. One night, when he'd already gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen alone, scrolling through Mary's texts again. The words blurred, but one line stuck out. "You'll regret this," I whispered to myself. "You already made sure I would." The next morning, I got a call from Grandma. Her voice was quiet, nervous. "Sweetheart, you need to listen carefully. I overheard your parents talking. They're saying they might go to a lawyer." My stomach dropped. A lawyer. For what? For this whole surrogacy thing. Something about medical necessity family rights. They think they can make you reconsider legally. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's insane. They can't force me to. I know she cut in, but they don't care what's legal, Susie. They care about what they think they deserve. Promise me you'll be careful. Her voice broke on the last word. I could hear it, the tremor of someone who's seen too much manipulation to believe it ever stops. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The kettle boiled over, hissing like a warning. Greg came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said. "I've seen my family." When I told him everything, he didn't even look surprised, just angry. "That's it," he said. "We're calling a lawyer, now." We found one the next day, a woman named Carla Jenkins, middle-aged, calm, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I told her everything, the letter, the threats, the texts. She listened without interrupting, then leaned for Washer. "Susie," she said, "there is absolutely no legal ground for what they're suggesting. They can't force you into any form of surrogacy, especially with your medical history. If they try, they'll be laughed out of court." I exhaled, but the relief didn't last. "They don't care about the law. They care about control." Carla nodded. "Then it's time you take that control back. Document everything. The calls, the messages, save every threat. If this escalates, you'll be ready." Greg squeezed my hand, and for a moment, I believed her. But 2 days later, my father showed up at our door. It was raining hard. He stood there in his gray coat, drenched, his expression set. Somewhere between anger and pity, the same look he used to wear when he scolded me as a child. "Dad," I said through the crack in the door, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Not a good time." He placed his hand on the door, stopping me from closing it. "Susie, listen to me. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Mary's in pain. Your mother's a wreck. You're the only one who can fix this." "By dying for her?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic," I felt my voice rise. "You want me to carry a child I can't survive giving birth to. You want your grandchild to grow up motherless just to keep Mary happy. That's not family, that's insanity." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You were always too emotional. Your mother warned me about this." That broke something in me. The little girl who used to beg for his approval was gone. "Get off my porch," I said, voice trembling with rage. He didn't move. "You'll regret this," he said, finally turning away. "When you need us, we won't be there." "Good," I whispered. "That's the point." When I closed the door, I realized my hands were shaking. Greg wrapped his arms around me, but my whole body still felt like it was vibrating from years of buried anger. Later that night, I sat in Noah's room watching him sleep. His small chest rose and fell calm, steady. I thought of what my mother had said, family helps family. But what they really meant was family obeys family. I whispered to my sleeping son, "You'll never owe me your life, Noah. You'll never have to pay for being born." The next morning, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed message unsigned. "If you won't do this willingly, we'll make sure you have no choice." Greg called the police that afternoon, but there was little they could do. No direct threat, the officer said. Could be a prank. A prank. We changed our locks that same night. I slept with the light on for a week. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the calls and messages stopped. Days passed, then weeks. The quiet was unnerving. I wanted to believe it was over, but I knew better. My family didn't give up. They regrouped. And sure enough, one evening my grandmother called again. Her voice trembled. "Susie, I think they've done something. You should come by." "What do you mean, done something?" "They're talking to someone. A man, a lawyer. They say they found a loophole." I felt my pulse skip. A loophole for what? "For making you do what they want." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. In the background, I could hear my grandfather coughing weakly. Then Grandma whispered, "Sweetheart, if I were you, I'd start preparing for war." I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping through Grandma's words. They found a loophole. Every scenario that ran through my head was worse than the last. Greg sat beside me in bed, his laptop open, searching legal articles, surrogacy cases, anything that could tell us what we were up against. The faint blue light carved worry lines across his face. "Even if they find some attorney desperate enough to take the case," he muttered, scrolling fast. "There's nothing they can do. No court can force someone into pregnancy. Not with your condition." I wanted to believe that, but my parents had never cared about couldn't, only shouldn't, and shouldn't never stopped them. The next morning, we met with Carla again. Her expression hardened when I told her what Grandma had said. "They're bluffing," she said, "but we'll make sure they can't push further." She helped us file a cease and desist for harassment and advised we change our phone numbers. Sometimes she said quietly as I gathered my things, "The only way to win with people like that is to stop playing their game." Those words sank deep. When we got home, I deleted every text, every voicemail, every screenshot. Not because I was done being angry, but because I was done being theirs. A few days later, Grandma called again. Her voice was trembling worse than before. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she whispered. "But your parents, they tried to file something. Some nonsense about family medical rights. The lawyer they went to refused. He told them it was unethical, maybe even grounds for investigation. They left furious." I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So it's over." "I think so," she said softly. Then after a pause, "I'm proud of you, Susie. You broke the cycle." That night, I cried the ugly kind of crying that starts in your chest and leaves you gasping. Greg just held me, saying nothing. Sometimes silence can be a kind of love, too. A week passed, then another. No messages, no threats, no shadows parked outside. For the first time in months, the air felt breathable again. Until one morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no name, just my initials scrawled in black ink. My stomach sank as I tore it open. Inside was a single line, typed neatly. "We're disappointed in you. You've let the family down." That was all. No signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that voice even when it hid behind ink. I stared at the page for a long time, expecting the familiar ache to come. The guilt, the need to explain, to defend, to beg for understanding that never came. But none of that happened. I felt nothing but clarity. I took the letter folded at once and fed it into the kitchen sink flame from a match. The paper curled, blackened, then vanished. When Greg came in, I looked up at him and said, "I'm done." He didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded, quietly relieved. That afternoon, I blocked every remaining contact from my family. Then I called Grandma. She didn't argue. She only said, "I understand. Sometimes love means walking away." In the days that followed, life began to feel normal again. Simple things like Noah's laughter, the smell of coffee in the morning, Greg humming as he worked on a design at the dining table. Every ordinary moment felt extraordinary after so much chaos. Still, there were nights I'd wake up and think about my parents not with anger, but with a strange, hollow pity. They'd traded their daughter for control, and now they had neither. One Sunday, I took Noah to the park. He ran ahead laughing, his arms spread wide like he was chasing the sky. Watching him, I thought about everything I'd promised myself as a child, that if I ever had a family of my own, I'd make sure love was something that healed, not something that hurt. I whispered under my breath, "You're free, little one." And so am I. But peace doesn't always mean closure. 2 months later, an envelope arrived in the mail, this time postmarked, stamped official. It was addressed from a law office in my hometown. My pulse stuttered as I opened it, expecting another demand, another threat. Inside was a single document, a surrogacy contract with my name already signed, forged. Underneath my forged signature was a sticky note in my mother's handwriting. "You were always meant to do this, Susie, one way or another." My vision blurred. For a second, the world went silent, that heavy, dizzy kind of silence that feels like falling underwater. Greg found me standing in the kitchen, shaking. I handed him the paper. He read it once, then looked at me with fury I'd never seen in his eyes before. "They forged your signature," he said, his voice shaking. "We can press charges. This is fraud." "I know," I whispered, "and we will." But beneath the anger, I felt something else, a cold finality. That was the last piece of them I would ever allow inside my life. That night, after putting Noah to bed, I packed every photo, every card, every relic of my family into a cardboard box. Wedding pictures of Mary, childhood portraits, letters from birthdays, all of it. I sealed the box, wrote "Return to sender" across the top, and mailed it to my parents' address the next morning. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. On the drive home, the sun was rising over the hills, spilling gold over the road ahead. I rolled the window down and let the wind hit my face clean, sharp, freeing. For the first time in 31 years, my chest didn't feel heavy. The same heart they once called defective was still beating steady, strong, unbroken. And for the first time, I realized it had never been the weak one. It was theirs.